Good morning.
Good morning, Lois. Liz is here, but she's getting water for the coffee.
Okay, I'm gonna be on my way. I'm gonna be listening, but on my way to a doctor's appointment. So
Okay. All
I
right.
will go, I'll go on mute and look forward
All right.
to
So
listening.
Lois said she's she's traveling en route to a doctor's office. So she's going to be.
Yeah, Liz, it's for she knows. I have thumb arthritis and they're gonna evaluate for rehab or whatever they do. We'll see.
Okay.
So, I think every joint I have has arthritis.
It is the lot
Yes.
of our bodies as we age. Speaking of bodies, so last week we read 19, Midbar 19, the beginning of the Torah portion of Chukas.
This gets so out of whack. Yes, that's what we read. How far did we read?
So we read the entire chapter 19. So this chapter, it's not the only one that talks about it, but it's one of the most detailed discussions of Tuma, of the state of Tuma, which is often translated as impurity. We talked a little bit about that last week. We don't have a great word for it to translate it. Tahor, we translate it as pure, and Tameh, we translate it as impure. So we talked a little bit about that last week. And one of the topics, I only have a few topics that I end up coming back to, but one of those topics is, where is I? Or who is I? What is I? Where is I? So if I'm pointing to my I, that's the letter I, not the EYE. So if I'm pointing to my I, where would I point? So a couple weeks ago, we had a cholent schmooze. lately the Chillin' Schmooze is peopled by young children with a few young adults sprinkled in there. So we were talking about the soul and the body, because you can with kids. And my son Sruli asked the kids to point to themselves. And so no, it was surprising. Like one pointed here, one pointed up, one pointed at me, one pointed at the wall. Now they were getting silly, but each step as they were getting silly was like a whole topic. If you wanted to go there, if you really wanted to go there. But typically we point here.
Yeah.
When we're pointing here, what are we pointing at? Like, why are we pointing here? If you had to
I
explain.
had to describe why, first of all, it's the easiest place for the arm to go.
Okay.
It's a straight bend from the elbow.
Okay.
It's also the middle of your body, pretty
Okay.
much, and it's your heart. You're pointing at your heart, which.
All right. So you think of your body and you think of your heart. I think most of us would agree that when we think of a person, we think first of their body. But if we were pushed, we would agree that the body is not enough.
Right.
That there's something else, something unseen, that is the person, and that's the part that leaves after, or that we no longer seem to be able to experience after the person dies. The unseen part we tend to call the soul. And we have a lot of different words for the soul. In Hebrew, we can call the soul nefesh, as it says in the towards the beginning of creation, and God blew into his nostrils a breath of life, and he became a living being, nefesh chaya. Sometimes nefesh is a word that's used. Sometimes ruach, which is another word for spirit, is used. Sometimes neshama is used, which means breath. So we tend to also speak of the person as unseen or a soul. And then you'll have a kind of spectrum where people land if they think of themselves more as the soul, more as the body. And a lot of times, especially in more contemporary rabbinic literature, we will be spoken of as a combination of body and spirit. Exactly how much body, how much spirit, again, that's on that spectrum. So you could simply say that death is the separation of body and spirit. In our tradition, there is an assumption that the spirit part existed before the body and continues to exist after it is separated from the body. That is our tradition.
I noticed, and this is kind of strange.
Yeah.
Yesterday was Gary's Yortzeit, so my daughter and I went out to the cemetery, and both of us took time to just stand by the grave and talk to him, tell him what's going on, as if he was right there listening.
Yeah. And?
We didn't get much of a response, but we felt like he was hearing us.
Now, you felt that more at the grave than you might have
Yeah,
just talking to him in your apartment.
yeah, now I talk to him all the time at home.
But it
I'll
felt
tell him,
more,
But it felt more direct.
okay. And it seems like mystics also understand that there is, for whatever reason, some at the grave, there is somehow a more intense or sharper or more clear or connection at the grave. I've heard it said in the name of Rav Nachman, although I don't know if he would be the originator, but that the grave, that there's some kind of shorter distance, as it were, between heaven and earth at the grave, that there's some kind of, but that might be a way of characterizing this. You certainly see more of a tendency amongst Hasidic people to visit graves, also Sephardic people, who tend to be more influenced by mystical teachings. But this is also true of Litvische people as well. When we were in yeshiva, we were encouraged to visit graves and to pray at their graves. We were not, and I again am trained more in the Litvische world. We were sort of warned against praying to the dead person. We were very much mentored to pray only to God, but in the merit of that person. But that's not the same thing as talking to the person. Talking to the person is not called praying to the person. Yeah, so, and also we tend, this was something that came up in a class yesterday or Tuesday, I think Tuesday, I don't remember, one day.
Was I there?
No, it might have been at the Nach and Nash class, but I think we've talked about it also. Nowadays, we tend to think of heaven as up, but in Tanakh, you'll see that the spirits are presented as if they are below. So, for instance, when the witch of Endor, the necromancer, when she raises the spirit of Shmuel the prophet, he comes from, the spirit rises from below. The reason we were talking about it was because we were studying Isaiah chapter like 56 or 57. I don't remember. I think it was 57. And the word Sheol came up over there. And in the translation, which was on Sfaria, I'm assuming they were using the JPS 1985 translation, but maybe not. Because I might have messed with it, and who knows what translation it was. But it translated Sheol as the netherworld. So growing up in a Christian society, as we do in Western culture, the netherworld is a term that seems to have association with hell, with the concept of hell. But it doesn't have to. The netherworld would just mean it's not this world.
It would mean the spirit world.
Right. But yeah, so Sheol translated as the deep. You could understand why somebody would think of the soul rising from below, because the person is buried in the ground, right? So where would the soul go if the soul is going to come from somewhere, it would come from the ground. Now, technically, as the Rambam feels he has to point out, which it might annoy him that he has to point this out, the soul is not any place per se. In other words, place is a physical phenomenon, a physical context. Only physical things have a place, strictly speaking. So the body is physical and subject to the physical laws, and therefore it has a place, but the soul, which is not made up of the physical, would, strictly speaking, not have a place in a physical world.
Right.
So that's why when those kids were pointing up or at me or towards the wall, each one of those could metaphorically be interesting, because when we use the word place for the soul, we're speaking in metaphor. We even speak of God being the place of everything. We call God Hamakom, the place. What do we mean by that? We mean that he is the context out of which everything comes, or which everything happens. So we move back and forth between metaphor and a kind of strictly specific physical kind of a terminology. And it can be confusing when you go back and forth between the body and the soul, because you're talking about one context with the body and then you're switching over to a different context with the soul. It's just easier perhaps to just keep them sort of in the same kind of context. But so technically speaking, and Moshe Chaim Luzzatto uses this way of speaking about death. Death is the separation between the soul and the body. Life is when the soul and body are together. Death is when the soul and the body are separated. So, but in that discussion, the question is, what is the body? So you could say, in the context of how we've been discussing it until now, that the body is a kind of junior partner of the soul. So if you say that, then to some degree the body is still the person. So one of the reasons I've been focused on this for the last while is because I keep on coming back to it, is because I'm still trying to understand what the body is.
Yep.
But like, for instance, in Bereshit, in the Torah portion of Chaye Sarah, at the beginning there, it deals with the burial of Sarah, and it continues to refer to the body as Sarah. Now, strictly speaking, if somebody thought of the soul as the person and the body as a kind of wrapper, which sometimes you'll hear, that the body isn't really the person. The body is just a container or a wrapper for the person. Then you wouldn't call the body Sarah. Sarah isn't there anymore.
Right.
Right. So, so again, things don't always have to be that carefully surgically rendered when you're speaking. But that might be a clue to the fact that the body is still connected to the personhood. It's not simply a wrapper of the person, but it's somehow a piece of who they are.
Yep.
Also, in our text, so just in reviewing our text, it's just interesting to me to see how the body is identified. So, for instance, when the body is first referenced, so in verse 11, it refers, in verse 11, the Hebrew is a mate. A mate. A mate here is a noun, but it is the word, it means a dead being. So if somebody touches a dead being, L'kol nefesh ha'adam. So this dead being was a living person, as opposed to an animal, right? So this person is then, what's the result? The person themselves is tameh for 7 days. So if I'm looking to understand the notion of tuma, let's say I drop the English word, I'm trying to get as close as possible to the essential meaning of this word, tameh or tuma. So I know that it's a condition that results from somebody touching a dead human body. So that person has this condition, which is called tameh. That much I know. And then we've been talking about this kind of elixir that has been made of the ashes of the red heifer and spring water. So that is sprinkled on this person. And the goal of the sprinkling over a period of 7 days is that the person should become tahor. So tahor is the other condition. It's the condition you are when you're not tameh. Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Again, when it speaks of the body, it in verse 13, again in the third word in the Hebrew is amate, bemate. So anybody who touches a mate, a space mate, memtoth or mace. So if somebody touches a mace, so that again is a mace that was a living person that had died. So it was a living person that died. And now again, it's talking about what happens if he goes into the Mishkan. You're not allowed to go into the area of the tabernacle, the sanctuary. All right, now in verse 14, it says, this is the Torah of an Adam. So this is, Adam is a human. Now, we have talked about this term before. Why is this term used to identify the human? One possibility is because the human comes from the Adamah. Right. What part of the human comes from the Adamah?
No living part.
Well, but the body. We don't necessarily suggest that the soul comes. He's standing there, right? That guy is.
I don't know.
Or maybe he's not there right now.
Yeah, where's Paula? I saw Paula.
Is that Lynn?
One of the kids.
Oh, okay. Not Lynn. Okay, if it was Lynn, somebody would have let her in. It's all right, just ignore it. Okay. So now we have it's not a new term for the Torah, but it's a new term. it's not even a new term for this thing, but now they're referring to Adam. They actually use the term nefesh Adam, a living person. So they've used Adam before. So again, but if Adam is the term being used, it would seem to emphasize the physical body.
Right.
This is talking about a human. This is talking about a human.
Absolutely.
But it would seem to be getting at the human from the physical body. It doesn't go off when you push there. I don't know why.
Doesn't ever go?
It eventually requires something from there to go off. So if we're talking about a living human, it seems to be approaching the living human from the notion of body, Highland. And I'm going to suggest here, because in the original description of the creation, in chapter 2, it talks about being formed out of clay,
Right.
and then having the Spirit of God blown into him. So the body seems to be from the earth,
Yep.
and the Spirit seems to be from God's breath. So when you're talking about the body as it is coming from the ground, that might be the source of the term Adam, human. So I'm just suggesting that when you use the term Adam, you are approaching the human from the body as opposed to when you use a term like nefesh, that might be more referencing the unseen. We see the effect of nefesh because the body is animated. When Dr. Frankenstein said, "He's alive." So he is expressing the effect of what we would call soul or spirit on the body, but you can't actually see it. But that might be more like nefesh, which at its simplest could mean just the animating spirit of the body, but it's still unseen. The animated part is reflected in the body, but its source is unseen. And then it says kiyamut. So you have an Adam when he dies in a tent. Anybody who comes into the tent will become tameh. So here he's called Adam. And then in verse 16, anybody who touches a sword, the body itself, which is called mate. So if you touch the sword or the mate, the dead body, or a bone of an Adam, or the grave, they are tameh for 7 days. And then again, you would take this remedy, this elixir, and sprinkle it on him and or her, and then they would become tahor, as it says at the end of verse 19.
What's tahor?
It is the state of being when you're not tameh. So again, it's often translated as pure, but we're trying to get away from the translation because that translation doesn't cover everything. And so we're trying to get to it without having to say the word. So it is the, you're trying to define it without using the word itself. So, so the state of being where you're not tameh is tahor, and you become tameh so far if you come in contact with the body with a sword that killed the body, or a bone, or a grave. And then it uses the word in verse 20, ish. Now, ish is a term for a person. It doesn't necessarily have the connection to the ground. If we say that Adam means that, from the ground, so ish doesn't have that same connotation. It's a synonym. It's another word for a person, sometimes it can mean a man. Doesn't always have to mean a man, depending on context. And here, it is not exclusively a male. So a person, that's how you translate it, but here a different word. And if he becomes tameh and he doesn't become pure, and then enters sacred places, the nichrata hanefesh hahi mitoch hakahal. The nefesh is cut off from amongst the congregation. So it now uses nefesh instead of ish. Now, ish means a person. Nefesh could mean a person, but in its most specific sense, it's speaking of the spirit of a person, what we would call soul. So again, you're moving from one of these to another, and you're just gathering data. You're just noticing what is being referenced and how it's being referenced. Okay.
Does that wording tell what you're saying? Whatever it says there? That
Am I
Hebrew.
contaminated then?
We all are.
well,
Okay.
We all are, because we've gone to the cemetery and we don't have the ashes of the red heifer. We haven't been sprinkled. You continue to have that state of tuma. Again, you use the word contaminated, which is not an incorrect word, but it's not a complete word for this. It's just you're in a state of tameh, or what we would call tuma.
Not really contaminated? Not really totally contaminated?
Well, if you think of contaminated like a disease,
Yeah.
you don't have a disease
Okay, but
from
you're-
it. You're not lesser of a person because you have it, but you are not in the state of tahara, or you are not tahor, which means that if there was a Beit HaMikdash now, you wouldn't be able to go to the Beit HaMikdash until this was resolved. But it's a state that needs to be resolved. We know aspects of it, and therefore we use words like impure or pure or contaminated or things like that, because they are the closest words that we have for something like this. The problem is they come with baggage, those words.
Right.
And the baggage does not necessarily apply to this situation. And therefore, you have to sort of be careful. That's why I'm trying to walk back some of these terms when we're talking about it. So we know there's a condition called tuma, or being tameh. We know it results from coming in contact with a dead body or a grave, or etc., or being in a room with a dead body. We know that there is some remedy to the state of tuma, but until the remedy is applied, we are still tameh. And then okay, so the very next story is a death story. And you could say that makes sense because we just talked about death and the state of tuma and resolving it and burying. So in chapter 20, if you want to read, this is going to be the death of Miriam. Did we read this?
No,
Okay, good. All right.
we stopped at.
Okay, all right.
The end of 19.
All right, so we're just going to read the first line.
Just the first line.
Right, so
The
far.
children of Israel, the whole assembly arrived at the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people settled in Kadesh.
Where's the
Keep
first line?
going. Miriam died there and she was buried there.
Okay, so you see how it's written? Miriam died, and she was buried there. So it's just another one of those things where she's not really buried. You know, like if you're
Yeah.
being real surgical, and you wanted to be real careful about how you're talking about a person, and you believe that the person is primarily the soul, to the extent that the soul is the person and the body is merely a conveyance, it's a vehicle, it's it's like a wrapper
Mhm.
for the person and a vehicle for the person in this world. So I've heard people use examples like a coat. You know, when you're walking, or clothing, when you're walking in the world, you have clothing or a coat. Or I've heard people use the notion of a vehicle. It's how you're mobile in this world. So clothing and cloaks can be tossed out and the person still exists. You
Right.
just replace the clothing and the cloaks. They're not the
And if
person,
we hadn't eaten the apple, we wouldn't have the clothes.
right? Even there, you right, and there the body would have been. It would just be the body,
Mhm.
right? So so let's say you think of it as a vehicle to get around it. So the same kind of thing when you're finished with your car, you get a different car. You as a person haven't changed, just the car changed. So you'll hear people use that imagery when they're talking about the body and the soul, and when they're comforting somebody about what happens after you die. So let's say I even used it in a conversation with my oldest son, AY, when he was young. So he must have been like 6 years old or something. And it seemed to be worried about being buried after you die. It was a scary notion that he would be buried in the ground. And so I used this metaphor that they're trying to suggest that you're not what gets buried in the ground. There is a part of you, there's something connected to you that gets buried in the ground, but you're not the part that gets buried in the ground. The part of you that continues to be aware is not in the ground. So, for instance, and then I compared it to wearing a coat. You come in from the outside, you put your coat in the closet. Are you scared because you're in a dark closet? No, because only your coat's in the closet. You're walking around the house in the light, surrounded by people. You're fine. So the thing is that there, from some angles you could use that, but these kind of lines challenge that. She was buried. Vatikaver Sham. Now, maybe somebody would translate it as it was buried there, because you don't strictly have to translate it as she was buried there. You could use it as it was buried there. So Miriam died there and it was buried there, but it's a weird transition. And again, you could say that the Torah doesn't have to strictly surgically reflect the deepest
What's the
theology.
Hebrew word used there?
Vati kaver, the word is to bury, but this is a verb form. So the verb form would be the same as if you said she was buried. This is reflexive. She was buried or it was buried. You'd use the same word.
Ah.
So, but I'm suggesting that's still awkward and so somebody could say that this and the discussion of Sarah in the Torah portion of Chai Sarah are indications that the body is a part of personhood. In other words, when I say I, it's not soul alone. It's soul and body. That without soul and body, I'm not I. And this could be an indication of that here and the discussion of Sarah. Or somebody could say, no, the soul is I, the body's not I. And then here, it's just not being exact, because there are times when it says the Torah speaks as people speak. It's sometimes the Torah is not reflecting the theology when it uses a word. Not every word necessarily reflects surgically a particular theology. Sometimes it's sacrificing that to speak like, because it's being written to people. So again, there is a kind of hybrid that you could say, which is, for now, I am combination of body and soul, and therefore my I has a particular quality for right now. But when I lose the body, my I still remains, and it's been slightly shifted. Just like when it came into this world, there was an adjustment, and who I am was tweaked a little bit. And when I die, it gets tweaked again. When I lose the body, and the notion of resurrection of the dead, that there's going to be body and soul, whatever that looks like. It doesn't have to look like a zombie, whatever that looks like. The resurrection of body and soul. That suggests that the body's important to my complete identity, if I have to have a body. Maimonides suggests that is only temporary, and eventually you're only a soul. There is no body. You're only a soul. Eventually, that would suggest the body's not ultimately important for my identity.
What are we now then?
So that's what
we're
exploring. That's what we're sort of exploring. So
what are we now?
That's what I've been exploring for the past 40 minutes. That's what I'm saying, that you could, there's a spectrum of possibilities. You could say we are simply a soul having a human experience, wrapped in a wrapper that we call a body, being conveyed in a vehicle that we call a body, but the body is not us. You could say that. There are reasons to point there. Or you could say that our identity is inextricably tied up with the body. And even though we can exist for a while without the body, eventually it has to come back together. And in Resurrection of the Dead, you could say that, and that the body is an essentially important part of who we are.
It has to be, because if it was just the soul, all the bodies could look the same.
Right. Well, you could say that different bodies have different purposes, just like you have different functions, or you have
part of your personality is what you look like.
Yeah, and it's useful for different reasons. But just like you don't, even though we could, you don't buy. Everybody doesn't buy the exact same coat.
Right.
And also, we have different coats depending on the weather, depending on And people have different functions. There's some people who are doing this, there's some people who are
Right.
doing that. So it could be the body's meant to
Would
reflect
be
the purpose
interesting
or
if all
function.
doctors looked alike, all rabbis looked alike.
My mother at one
Be
point
so good.
thought that. One time my mother was visiting and we were in,
Lois probably
Okay.
left.
that's right. One time we were in the Mea Shearim area, my mother and I,
Uh-huh.
and we split up. And then when we got back together, she goes, everybody looked like you. I just kept on thinking. I kept on thinking, there he is. No, that's not him. There he is. No, that's not him. There he is. No, that's
Well, yeah, in that area.
They all look
they
alike.
alike.
Right. Okay, so that allowed us to have that conversation. And so you will hear people also when they talk about the state of being tameh, the state of tuma, that hesitate to use the word pure or to use the word impure or contaminated because they don't capture everything and they tend to have baggage with them. So they just saying the word tameh and its counterpart, the word tahor, which is often translated as pure. And last week, there's a friend of mine, Rahmiel Drizzen, who prefers a term which was coined by somebody else. I forgot what her name was, but there was somebody who coined the term death residue. Death residue. So tuma is death residue, and so when a person comes in contact with the dead, there is some kind of residue of the experience. Somebody might consider it a bit of trauma that comes that needs to be healed before the person is ready to fully embrace the life of sanctity. So that's all in an attempt to try
What's
to
the
get
life
to
of
something closer.
sanctity? What's the life of sanctity?
So it's a life of sanctity would be either it could be expressed by, let's say, going to the Beit HaMikdash, to the temple, and being involved with the offerings. Let's say you're at a Seder and you're eating from the Korban Pesach, it is itself an offering. But you could say that the world of offerings and the Beit HaMikdash is itself a symbol of a relationship devoted to God and a relationship with God in its fullest experience. So somebody might say that a life of sanctity means a life fully given over to service of God and God's purpose in the world. It could be there's somebody who's fully devoted to the well-being of others, and that's also called sanctified. That's what Rabbi Shimon Shkop says. When it says Kadoshim Tiyu, be holy or be sanctified, he suggests that the meaning is to be wholly devoted to the well-being of others, ultimately. But even that, why is that called sanctified? Because you're mimicking God, who is wholly devoted to the well-being of others, and you're fulfilling God's charge, God's mission, God's dream for humankind, which is to be wholly devoted to the well-being of creation. So that could be a sanctified life. Sanctified life. The life of tahor, which is somehow impeded when somebody is tameh. Okay, so the next story, this first line is really part of the next story. I just wanted to do that alone because I wanted to touch on that subject that we were talking about before. So now we are going to read about the waters of strife. The waters of strife. This is a involved section that first begins with a complaint that there isn't water, And then
Where we go?
right. So it goes all the way through verse 13. So I'm gonna say we're gonna hold off reading this, but we're just gonna talk for a second
Okay.
about why there's no water. So Rashi quotes the Talmud on this next verse where it said there was no water, and the quote from Rashi is, "From here, we learn that for the 40 years that they were in the wilderness, the water that they had was in the merit of Miriam. Once Miriam dies, the water sort of dries up, as it were, which indicates that Miriam is the reason there was water." And they refer to that water source as the well of Miriam, or the wellspring of Miriam.
Right.
So that's a really interesting connection to Miriam. Her name, you could split her name into two parts. Her first two words are memresh, so they could be bitter, mar, and the last two are yam, which is sea.
Right.
There was a woman in one of my class. There was the women in one of my classes knew another woman. They were telling me about another woman that they know, whose name used to be Miriam, but she didn't like the connotation with bitter. So she changed her name to Tamara. She took the Mar part and changed it to Tamara, which means like date palm. But it doesn't have to be that this is a cognate of bitter and sea, but you could. The reason I'm bringing it up is because yam, which is sea, and that would be a water connection. Plus, if you took out the resh, then it's mine. So water is there. That word. Yeah. So there's a woman, Judy Klitzner, who's a scholar that's associated with the Pardes, the Shiva in Jerusalem, and is close to Aviva Zornberg. And Aviva Zornberg told me that she often points out, it's one of her sort of hobbies, scholarship hobbies, are puns in the Torah. She believes that the Torah makes use of puns extensively. And but here you see, I mean, I'm not suggesting that she's pointing this out, but to me, you see Miriam and Mayim, they're very close words. There's like a resh, and then you have Mayim. So you have that. Then you have the earliest association between Moshe and Miriam, which is that
She puts him in the water.
His mother put him in the water.
Yeah, right.
She's the one who follows him
Followed it.
while he's in
Tended
the
him.
water, and she watches until he's taken out of the water. But but she's very much a presence there as Moshe is in the water and being protected from the water. But so Moshe and Miriam have a water context with each other. And this story is going to be a dramatic story in the life of Moshe. This water story is going to be the reason why he's told the reason why he doesn't get to go into the land of Israel. So this is a very dramatic story, and it seems to be coming out of the death of Miriam, and it's it's all about water. And I mean, and water itself is,
Life-giving.
yeah, it's so hugely important and so much a part of the story of mankind, not just Miriam and Moshe, but so this is something to follow as we move forward. I look forward to doing that next week. Next week. Look forward. Be well.
That works for me.
Okay.